Okay, welcome in, welcome in. We're going to let some people trickle in here as we just get started, but we have a ton to talk about. May seem like we're in the middle of the off season, but make no mistake, there is no shortage of college football content. We have Elite 11 to talk about. We have the SEC schedule reveal we have to talk about. We have recruiting news. We have transfer portal news. You name it, we're going to be covering it today, which is why we're going to let a few people trickle in. As we're letting people trickle in, I don't know that there's a better place for us to start as people are coming in than recruiting, right? It's the easiest for us to talk about. It is the name of the game right now. Without the SEC schedule being revealed yesterday, that would be the major talking point for everybody in college football. And when we're talking recruiting right now, I find myself gravitating towards one team in particular, and that's Clemson. Look, I talked about this the other day. Whenever you start following recruiting, whenever you start watching the landscape of college football recruiting, there are a few things you need to watch out for. And if you start realizing these few things, you can kind of see the tea leaves and start reading them. Now, it's recruiting. You're going to be wrong. I'm wrong. Everybody's wrong a lot more than they're right. But that's what's fun about this, right? The people that are involved in this are wrong. People change their minds all the time. It's just a great time. But I bring this to your attention because whenever we hear about Clemson, there's one word that comes up time and time again. Now, it may manifest itself in different variations, but at the end of the day, it's all the same. And that's culture. Culture. You hear time and time again when these prospects leave Clemson, it's the culture. It's the culture of Clemson. And it's really incredible when we look at what's really happened to Clemson over the past few years. I mean, we're talking about a team that was riding the highest of highs on the national stage, competing with Alabama for national championships every other year, it seemed like. Trevor Lawrence came through, Deshaun Watson before him, and then on to DJ Uongale. And then the offense started to sputter, right? Then the offense started to sputter. And then Brent Venables takes the job at Oklahoma, brings Todd Bates with him, brings Ted Roof with him, people that have been associated with Dabo Swinney in that program for a while, and people, including myself, I'm certainly not absolving myself of this, we were wondering, what's Clemson going to do? Brent Venables is widely regarded as one of the best defensive coordinators in the nation. He's no longer there. Todd Bates, widely regarded as one of the best defensive line coaches in the nation. He's no longer there. Ted Roof has that rapport, constant college football presence, and he's no longer there. Well, all we've seen Clemson do is continue to be Clemson, really. And when we look on the recruiting trail, the past 2 weeks have been good to the Tigers. We're talking 5-star Sammy Brown. We're talking 5-star Bryant Wesco. We're talking 4-star TJ Moore, who, if y'all haven't had the opportunity, go check out his highlights. Personally, I feel like that's an underrated prospect. We're talking two big body wide receivers that have big playability written all over them. And now I want to turn your attention to the class of 2025, where they just got another big win. 4-star running back out the state of Virginia, top 75 player in the nation, comes in at number 67, the number 4 running back, the number 2 player in Virginia, standing over 6 foot, over 200 pounds, Gideon Davidson. And on top of all of this, I mean, we're talking a physical running back has logged a sub 10-7, 100-meter dash. Look, one thing we need to understand, Dabo has turned Clemson into a machine. And if you were someone who doubted, if you were someone who maybe questioned, which is me, I questioned, I'll be the first to admit it, and I'm eating my crow right now. I wouldn't say I doubted Clemson, but I did have a healthy curiosity as to what the Tigers would look like when their offense was sputtering, when Brent Venables leaves. Dabo Swinney continues to recruit at a high level. They've got talent on the team. They get Garrett Riley, and they are really positioning themselves in a good position in the class of 2024 and already turning to the class of 2025. The Clemson machine is rolling, ladies and gentlemen. It is. It absolutely is. Now, what this means on the national stage, we have to see. There are several teams in the ACC trying to make moves, but that 12-team expanded playoffs, that's going to be massive for Clemson. Now, we're going to put a little bit of a bookmark in the recruiting because we have enough people in here right now. I think it's a great time to transition, hit some comments. Keaton says, let's go, fellas. Boomer, happy you're in here. Keaton Shadow, glad you could join us. So excited about joining the SEC, says J51. And motivated, dedicated, says UGA 15-0. Look, with the schedule UGA has in 2023, It's going to be very hard for them to lose a game before the SEC championship. We'll talk about that at a later date just because we're going to be inundated with this 2024. But yeah, motivated. I can't recall a team that I thought was as well suited to three-peat as Georgia for several different reasons. And I'll quickly get into them before we transition into this. One, a lot of the other big teams in the nation are replacing a quarterback. You're looking at Alabama, you're looking at Ohio State. Texas is interesting, but I mean, now we have to ask how far away is Texas from getting there, right? Like, how far away are they from the playoffs? I bring up Texas because they return a starting quarterback who's very talented. USC is right there. They return Caleb Williams. But you get the point I'm making, right? Like, I just brought up Texas and USC, and instantly people are going to hit the comments and saying, yes, but are they playoff teams? Well, that's a conversation. I don't know. It's a big debate there. But when we look to the teams that are conventional playoff teams under the 4-team college football playoff, a lot of them don't have a quarterback returning. Now, neither does UGA. But you know what UGA does have? An incredibly easy schedule, an incredibly favorable schedule. Now, in 2024, we're going to take a look at that. But in 2023, they have a very favorable schedule. I don't know who they're going to get tested by the SEC championship game. As always, circle that. But they have a lot of talent on the defense. They have a lot of talent on the offense. They may replace a quarterback, but ladies and gentlemen, I think, in my opinion, the bigger thing, and motivated, I'm interested in hearing from you, and then we are going to transition. The bigger thing for me in replacing Stetson Bennett had supreme command of the offense. He was fantastic in that offense. Todd Monken. I don't think Todd Monken gets his flowers. Granted, that was a very talented team, right? I get it. It's very easy to say, oh, well, he had this, this, and this. He put together a beautiful offense that was very balanced. Whenever they would need to go into a different area, they typically had an answer. I get it. There were some low scoring games, but at the end of the day, Georgia was a grinding pro style team. Mike Bobo had success at Georgia, guys. He did. The last time he was there, he put up points. That's what I'm most interested in. We know what the defense is going to be. As long as Kirby Smart walks those hallways, we know what the defense is going to be. And I think the offense is going to be a continuation of more of the same because Bobo was just an analyst. So that's going to be something very interesting to see. But without further ado, let's get into the 2024 schedule. And guys, there is some interesting things here. Let's start with Alabama. We'll just do this straight in order. You see the home games. You get Auburn, Georgia, Missouri, South Carolina. I think if you're Alabama, you have to be very happy with that, right? Georgia's going to be a tough game. Getting Georgia in Tuscaloosa, let's be honest, motivated. Come on, right? Come on. That's awesome for college football fans everywhere. Unbelievable. Bama versus Georgia. That's awesome, right? That's going to be a great time. Missouri, a team I'm super interested in 2023 and moving on, is Missouri. I think they're a team we need to circle. We talk about this frequently on the SEC Connect, usually going live Wednesday evenings. We didn't last night as Nino had a big event going on. Several of us were kind of on the move. So if you're looking at this from a home perspective, I think you have to be happy. I don't know of an Alabama fan that would tell you they'd rather play Auburn in Jordan-Hare than in Tuscaloosa, right? Like, and Keaton, I don't disagree with you. Bama does have a hard schedule, but I think when we look at how this breaks down, you're happy you play Auburn at home, right? You're happy you play Georgia at home. You're happy you play South Carolina at home. And speaking of South Carolina, I think there's a whole conversation we have to have about them. Spencer Rattler won't be there. What do they look like? Now, granted, they've been recruiting better and better. They've made some moves in the transfer portal, but this is going to be a big year for the Gamecocks. That's why we need to circle them as well as Missouri. Let's move on to the aways. This is where it gets really interesting, right? Next fall, my stepfather grew up. That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Yeah, that's going to be an incredible game. Let's get one thing clear. No matter who you root for, let's be real here. We're all college football fans, right? That's an incredible college football game. That's going to be an incredible college football environment. That's what this is all about. That's awesome. Can't wait for that game. It's going to be great. Away, you have LSU. We know And for Oklahoma fans in here, for Texas fans in here, I mean, y'all know as well. You're all college football fans. I don't have to tell you what Death Valley is. We all know. That's one of the most hostile places to play in all of college football. And LSU is an interesting team. Guys, we would be remiss if we just looked at LSU and said, because they have Bryant Kelly as their coach and what he did at Notre Dame, they're a team that almost has a perennial cap. I would ask you this question. Does LSU with Brian Kelly have a cap, or did Notre Dame with Brian Kelly have a cap? The reason why I frame it the way I do is because we know that Notre Dame has more strenuous barriers to entry than does most of college football. That's just the reality of the situation. Now we look at what he can work with in Louisiana. Yeah, Baton Rouge is tough. Tough. Sooners have a very winnable. Yep. So does Texas. Yeah, we'll get into that. Texas is interesting. They're both fun. Both fun, Jay. And like I said the other day when I texted you, Jay, if you want a link, you just let me know. We'll get you in here and talk. If you want a link, you just let me know. We'll get you in here. And we'll both talk about this. But I bring that up because Louisiana, he has unlimited resources at LSU. They're going to want to win football games. They are as dedicated to winning in the SEC as anybody. They don't have any competition within the state. None. The competition they face is going to be A&M, Texas, Alabama, Georgia in terms of recruiting. Don't get me wrong. Every team in the nation is camped out in Louisiana. We know what they produce. Look in the NFL. Full of Louisiana prospects. Brian Kelly has that untapped. Now, there was a kid not too long ago, right, that originally had committed to Colorado. And at first, we don't think anything of it. Colorado's riding a high. Coach Prime's riding a high. We talk about this. But even then, even someone like myself who's talked about Coach Prime and the intrigue he's bringing there, why the prospects are looking there, LSU came around in no time at all, flipped that prospect back. I'm just painting you the picture of how powerful LSU is as a brand to prospects inside the state lines. Very tough to beat that program. LSU is always going to be a tough game, even tougher when you play them in Death Valley. That right there is going to be something we have to circle. Jaden Daniels will probably not be there anymore, but they have Garrett Nussmeier. And guys, I don't know if you watched Garrett Nussmeier, but Garrett Nussmeier lit into Georgia. Granted, I always try and be fair and objective. Georgia was prepping for a dual threat quarterback in Jaden Daniels. He goes down. Georgia had already won the game. Nussmeier, they weren't prepared for him. He threw a jab, caught them in the chin. Georgia still won the fight. That's not the question here. It's just we saw a guy that you do have to be aware of in Nussmeier. Tennessee and Oklahoma, right? We'll start with Oklahoma. Oklahoma gets Alabama in Norman. Welcome to the SEC, right? I mean, what more could you want? Your first year in the SEC, you get Alabama at home. I think if you're Oklahoma, you have to like this, right? Like if you were going to have to play Alabama, you no doubt want to play them at home your first year in the SEC. There's still a lot of work that Brent Venables is doing with this Oklahoma squad. So being able to have that home field advantage, I think that's awesome. You would, I've already said it, you would much rather have this at Norman than in Tuscaloosa. And we saw jokes on Twitter, right? The 11 o'clock kickoff. If it's an 11 o'clock kickoff, I'm going to laugh. That would be really funny just because Oklahoma coming from a situation where they're trying to get away from that 11 o'clock kickoff. Yeah. Motivated. I know the Georgia fan. Yeah. Nussmeier can play. They have to keep him healthy. 100% agree, man. He was actually in high school, maybe 20 minutes south of where I'm sitting right now. Got to see him play several times. I mean, we know his family lineage as far as quarterbacks go, right? Like he's someone who's prepped for the college game, and he has a lot of weapons out there at LSU. But it was actually probably a good thing for your Dogs to play a quarterback like that, especially going into the playoffs, because it was almost one of those situations where you go into a fight, you're sleepwalking, and then you get punched, and it's like, oh, now the fight begins. Got it. Cool. We're here now. Probably a good thing. You never like that. They can motivate it. They have the past year, but I don't know that that's indicative of a normal Bama team. But I you're not wrong. There is no argument for the past year. What Alabama experienced, the discipline has got to get better. If they bring in the same discipline from last year into this year, it's not going to be pretty. I don't disagree with you there, but I do think that the struggles have been really bad the past year. Before then it was kind of Bama was doing Bama things. No disagreements right there. So Oklahoma gets Alabama at home. You got to like that. Tennessee. I have some questions about Tennessee. Jay is coming in here in a bit. That's going to be great because I want to ask him some things, right? I want to ask him where he thinks Tennessee will be. I have a lot of questions about Tennessee this year and what they're going to do. Because I think when you look at Tennessee, they relied on a veteran quarterback. Now, they have a veteran quarterback in terms of college football experience, but they don't have a veteran quarterback in terms of reps with this team, even though he was the starter for some point. It's just there was a change, right? That does happen. And so I'm looking at the situation for Tennessee. This is going to be a really big year. But Tennessee gets Alabama away, or at least in terms of Alabama. You have to go to Tennessee. You just lost in Knoxville. You played Tennessee in Tuscaloosa this year in 2023. You have to go back. Alabama is going to be out for blood. And at least in theory, Alabama should have more answers in 2024 than they currently do in 2023. 2023, they're replacing a lot, and they will replace things in 2024. It's just they should have a bit more answers in place. This is going to be a young Bama team in some of the areas. The road, yeah, A&M is a wacky place, but I grant you that. Bama can get beat on the road. Yeah, like I said, motivated. It's mainly been last year. I grant you the A&M game, but I think we can also point to several instances where Kyle Field is just kind of one of those places, almost like Jordan Hare. And you'll know exactly what I mean when I say that, motivated. I know you will. It's just like Jordan Hare, where unexplicable things happen. Just wild, unexplicable things happen. That's what makes Jordan Hare so much fun. OU's 20 is not winnable. Bama, LSU, and Texas are probably the L's. Those programs are just further ahead than us. I'm guessing 6. Yeah, we'll get to that when we get to Oklahoma. It is going to be winnable in aspects, but then you also get your welcome to the SEC and others. And then the last game is Vanderbilt. So let's look at this from a top-down approach, right? Alabama was in a situation where Nick Saban supported the 9-game model. Then Alabama voted against it. Yeah, I knew you'd like that, motivated, because I know you as a Georgia fan know exactly what I'm talking about that stadium. It's cursed. It is cursed. You can go in there, everything will go your way, and at the drop of a hat, the wildest things start happening, and you're just like, what is going on here? That makes it a lot of fun, right? It does. Very happy that Auburn and Georgia keep their thing up. That's awesome. Jay, sending it to you right now. Let me see. So we have Vanderbilt last. Vanderbilt's kind of the consolation to Alabama. What I was going to say is we know that there was a big debate about 9-game, 8-game SEC schedule with 3 fixed permanents. The reason why we're not getting that in 2024 before we go any further is simply money. Guys, ESPN wanted to pay the SEC teams the same amount of money they were going to make for an 8-game schedule. They wanted to pay them the exact same amount for a 9-game schedule. The SEC looked at that and said, yeah, if you want us to play one more game, if you want us to play a Mississippi State, an Oklahoma, a South Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, you're going to have to pay us to play that team. Wasn't in the works yet, so we'll get there. And now we have Jay coming in here right in time as we kind of looking at the top-down approach and then going into Arkansas, my man. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me. I had 30 minutes before jumping to the next thing for work. And I was like, you know what? I'm here and talk with Ty since he's talking crazy on this schedule. Kidding.
Yeah, man. I think as an Alabama fan, it's definitely a tough schedule, but I think you're happy you get some of the teams where you do, right? Like getting Georgia at home, getting Auburn. Granted, it was always going to be Auburn at home because of the way that it flips.
The schedule works,
Georgia,
right?
Yeah, getting Georgia at home, I think that's great, right? That's one where it's just like, okay, if you're going to play Georgia, especially in a situation where Alabama, they should have more questions answered in 2024 than in 2023, just because you might have a quarterback still be present in 2024, depending on. So that's what I mean. You'd much rather play Georgia at home, especially with the behemoth they've become.
No, I totally agree, especially even with your assessment around Tennessee, having them on the road is between. Honestly, I think Bama has one of the toughest road schedules.
Yes.
And I say that because they're going up against teams that one are historic as far as being able to compete. Two of the three are guaranteed to have starting quarterbacks, with Oklahoma having Jackson Arnold as a sophomore or redshirt freshman ready to go. He'll have a year under the belt under the system. He should be ready.
We could say three.
Nussmeier, that's true.
Nico,
that's true. And Jackson Arnold. Yeah. And I say this about Vanderbilt over the last couple of years, man. Can't sleep on them. They somehow squeak out 6-6 seasons, and they occasionally come out of nowhere with stupid competition.
I'm sorry, I'm a little narcoleptic. What'd you say?
I knew he was going to pull that. But I'll say this, though. I think the question for me when it comes to these opponents is, when will they be scheduled? Like I posted in the chat, I really think that Bama, Oklahoma, Georgia, Texas will probably be the second weekend of the season. That's probably the best way to introduce everyone to the SEC. That should be the first SEC game for both. It'll be probably the biggest weekend. And the struggle for ESPN is figuring out who gets game day. And if they want to make sure game day goes to both, they'll probably swap it and do like the first weekend and the second weekend. But they've got to be the start of the season. The other question is, for Bama, has been exactly as you said, the quarterback. Who's going to be the quarterback? And we'll talk about this a lot more on the Travis and JP show tonight. But that's the one thing I've wondered. And that's the only reason why I said Oklahoma's schedule looks winnable to me, because the biggest fear for me with Alabama is the fact that last year y'all had all those 5-stars come through. It's with like 6 of them. They'll be redshirt freshmen and sophomore coming into these games, either one of the two, depending on if they play or not. If you got that, they've got the experience. They're in the system. They're going to be tough. They're going to be ready to play. And so you'll have a young squad of a bunch of elite athletes. Caleb Downs, we know he's probably going to start this year.
Oh, I think he's already locked up one of those spots.
So then you're going to have an experienced him the next season. I think Bama's defense is going to be unquestionable. They'll be great. They're going to be a great defense next season, especially with the youth movement. I think the question is going to be just around the quarterback position and what Tommy Rees is going to do and who's going to be established as the key guy. Once that's figured out, I could determine if Alabama will be at the pinnacle or they'll be just right underneath it with like 1 or 2 losses. But outside of that, though, I think y'all do have the most good.
Either it's at the pinnacle, or man, they might not be Bama and they'll lose 1 or 2 games. That's just a wild perspective to look at this. Like, oh, if Bama's off 1, 2 losses at worst, 3 losses, the world is falling apart. That's just a wild place to be.
It is, and that's just what Nick Saban has created.
Yeah,
coming in there, doing what he's been doing since 2007. This is what you expect now. So
I will say this. I have a big question for them in 2024. Depending on who wins, or I'm sorry, in 2023 at the quarterback position, depending on who wins, they have Julian Sayin coming in the this class. He'll be a 5-star true freshman. He's currently at Elite 11. We're going to talk about that. There are 3 quarterbacks that, depending on any outlet you go to, there are 3 quarterbacks that have come in the top 5 of every single outlet, no matter who's there. And Julian Sayin is one of those. He's a guy that I actually have as a must-land prospect for Alabama, something that we are going to get into at the very end of this. That's a name, to spoiler alert. Now, granted, it's still a question because he would be a true freshman, but he's someone that I could see providing a little bit of stability. But to your point, man, it's a true freshman. Can we really say I can theory craft a true freshman answering the questions, but we can't say anything tangible until it happens, right? So completely fair. This Arkansas schedule, man. So here's the thing. You have to like that you get LSU, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Texas at home. All of those. But then you have to go play in Jordan Hare, right? And then you get the neutral site with Texas A&M. Now that Texas A&M game, that has always been just a wild ride whenever these two meet up. You have Auburn, Mississippi State, Missouri. We talked on the SEC Connect about Missouri and their future. I think my biggest question, man, is what does Arkansas look like in 2024? KJ Jefferson won't be there anymore.
Yep. Yep. And we talked about that on the SEC Connect a couple weeks ago. We went through their schedule for this coming season. They have no excuse not to go 10-2 at minimum. Like, they have the perfect lineup for their schedule this year, and hopefully that builds up their recruiting class.
I have a lot of questions for them.
Yeah, I do too. But when you look at who's on the slate, I mean, they're very much winnable games. Every single game, except for probably 2, is winnable for Arkansas. And so looking at them going into 2024, you're right. Who's going to sling the ball? And I think that's the biggest question I have going around the gauntlet with it, even with Auburn. The same thing. It's who's going to be your quarterback going forward, because without something, I guess you could say, established, that's where the huge question marks come, especially in the SEC nowadays. If you don't have a borderline generational talent at quarterback, teams are exposing you because the defenses are just so much more stout. They're convincing really good wide receivers to play DB just to get athleticism out there. You got to have something there. And so that's the only reason why, like looking at Arkansas's, that's what concerns me about this schedule. It's awesome. They have their toughest games at home.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that you're going to be, you said it perfectly earlier before I got on about LSU. I've said this, you'll hear me say this ad nauseum. Brian Kelly's going to win a championship there within the next 6 years. Unless he's an awful coach. And we know he's technically not. We've seen what he's done at Notre Dame. He's winning these Louisiana players that usually go out of state because they want to compete for championships. He gets more of those at LSU. He's going to have an Ed Orgeron run. He's going to have a generational talent team that's going to win. And so Arkansas is going to struggle in that game. Lane Kiffin, if he's still at Ole Miss and doesn't try to take another job, I don't know what that looks like. But Heupel's not going anywhere from Tennessee. They're going to throw as much money at him as possible to keep him around just because of stability case. You know, they've seen the instability over the last few years.
And if Texas, I want to get this in here because for everybody in the chat, this is also a Tennessee fan who, Jay, for everybody who's not aware, constant friend of the show, Unfair Sports. If you don't subscribe over there, please go do that for me. Great content. Always on my show. If I have a guest on, you can bet Jay has probably been invited. He either couldn't make, but yeah, it was known. This is also a Tennessee fan who Jay and I talked about. He questioned the extension Heupel got. Not whether he thought that Heupel was a good coach, but he was just like, is it early? Is it? So this is a very reasonable Tennessee fan that sits across from me. Not that I've had good interactions with almost every fan base. I'm not going to lie to you. I've had very good.
Same.
Sharp, I also want to hear from you, man. Please let me know. Why don't you see it? I'm genuinely curious, man. This is a great topic, right? Because there are people who take that approach and they have reasonable positioned arguments. And I'd love to hear yours. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I have the question on that too. Because like that's usually what everybody states on the LSU piece. Is I don't see Brian Kelly ever having a chance or doing anything like that. I mean, he was able to go to the playoff with Notre Dame, and he struggled getting the true elite players there just because of the standards that Notre Dame requires. It's really, really hard to get in. It's similar to Georgia Tech. That's the reason why Georgia Tech is honestly never really that good, is because their freshman filter class, as I like to call it, basically the class to determine if you should be at this school or not, is calculus. So every freshman walks in and takes a tough calculus class at a technical institution. It ain't easy. So it's a good way to filter people out.
I knew there's a reason I didn't go to Georgia Tech.
And that's it. And so looking at, I've heard of people that got into some of the top economics programs, graduate programs that had like a B or C average at Georgia Tech. And they got in because they were able to achieve a B to C average at Tech. That tells you something, right? It's that tough. But I digress on that. That's the question I had when it came to Heupel getting that extension. More so was, is it really that, should you extend him now? You know that he's potentially going to bring stability, but are you going to, get a knee-jerk reaction if he does have a bad season and want to fire him immediately? That's that's why I hate when you do an extension too early, because then there's an opportunity for somebody to get fired. Like they're gonna fire you and then owe a whole bunch of money, and then you can't go after the coach you really want. Don't want to deal with that. But that's going to be the question. Luckily for Tennessee, they actually have a contingency plan with their quarterback. That's where that game's going to be tough for a lot of people. I think it's going to be tough for Oklahoma. And as Gabriel asked the question, who am I rooting for in that game? Man, I don't know who I'm going to root for because I love both. I love my Sooners and I love my Vols. And so I'm just going to be there enjoying football at that point. That's just, I'll be happy regardless of who wins, unfortunately, because I just love the game. But they have a contingency plan. That's very few teams on this list really have a contingency plan that we can talk about.
And
right?
Here's one thing I wanted to piggyback off of, because you're right. But that's also something, this is a little bit of a double-edged sword, man, because we can talk about Alabama not having one, we can talk about Arkansas, but then we can go across the board. We can even look at, okay, Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma. We know he's a very talented quarterback, but he may be playing his first snaps of college football starting in the SEC. Right.
Fair.
And so then we're once again continuing the conversation of a quarterback we think is very gifted, but just doesn't have the experience. And that gets us into the same conversation we have about in Alabama. That gets us into the same conversation we have about Texas, right? Where I love all the Texas quarterbacks they have on that roster. Quinn's not going to be there.
That's true.
So who's the guy? I think it's going to be Malik. I think we know what Malik can do. He just hasn't started a game yet, right? We know what he can do. My goodness gracious.
I'm trying to figure out why he's not the starting quarterback now. We talk about that so many times, dog.
It's because when
I don't
Quinn
want
is
him to
clicking,
play.
dog, when Quinn is clicking, it is
You're right.
automatic. Like it almost, I don't know how to describe it, but
It can be
watching
poetic.
him play an yes.
It can be poetic when he's on.
When he's on, it's almost like a basketball player where it's just like, I don't even have to look at the rim. I'm just throwing it up and it's nothing but net. And it's just like, there are very few guys that can do that. When he's on, he is, wow, unbelievable. Hopefully this is the year where it all comes together. Hopefully he stays healthy. I'd love to see him reach his ceiling. I just think it'd be good for the state of Texas, South Lake Carroll producing another big quarterback. Right. Cool storylines. I'm for that. Now let's get into that orange team who we don't reference a whole lot. Thomas, I can't read that first word you have, but you say someone has a pretty good schedule, 4-4 probably only 2 games away. Yeah. So let's look at Auburn.
So
you have to go to Jordan Hare. Good luck.
Yeah, I do want to. That is that. Yeah.
No, you don't.
Gonna, woo.
No, you don't. You don't want to go there.
I just love the hate, the venom that you have there, and I just love it. Just FYI.
I'm telling you, it is a wild place. It makes no sense. I am convinced there's a glitch in the Matrix, and there's a place where like the corporeal dimensions just all seed their power there, and the wildest things happen, and it's Jordan Hare. Why it's there, I don't know. That's not for me to understand. I'm just here to tell you what it is. Yeah.
But it exists. No, that's fair point. That's fair. Looking at this, and I like the statement of 4-4. 4-4. Yes, that is a possibility. Honestly, the game, and this is also going to be the second year with Hugh Freeze, and so we'll actually see what Auburn looks like in 2024. This year in 2023, they've got talent. It's just the question of about him putting it together quickly and making it work. Next year, we should see more influence of Hugh Freeze and see what he can, if he still got that SEC capabilities that he had when he was at Ole Miss. Now, this is the big question I have when it comes to that is, can he actually capitalize on the talent at Auburn, or will their boosters force him to not be able to do what he says? That's hilarious. I love the trolling.
This is the thing, man. Bama usually has a good amount of talent in the state, right?
Yes.
It's not a Texas. It also doesn't have the population of a Texas or a Florida. But per capita speaking, the state of Alabama is usually very talent rich if we're looking at this from a per capita basis.
Very fertile grounds, very robust, yes, because it means more, just like it does in Oklahoma. It's the southern states. It just means more.
It does, guys. Look, I've had the ability to travel a lot because my parents were in the horse industry, and there were times where we had to take family vacations because we had to go to a horse show. I couldn't be left alone. So I've gotten to see a lot. And high school football, is wild. And Jason, you make a phenomenal point. Thank you so much, because I was hoping to make it, but I was probably going to forget. Thank you so much. Auburn is right by Georgia. I mean, on the line.
Yes.
The talent is not an issue. Great point, Jason. Thank you so much for that. They can double dip fairly easily. If I'm not mistaken, the high school that's right there, a lot of players from Georgia will go and go to school there because it's right on that line. Jason, let me know if I'm right. I'm fairly certain that's no, bad. But look, here's the thing. Auburn has a brutal schedule. Guys, let's just look at this from a talent perspective. Like just from a about the horse industry? Sure. Yeah. My dad went, by the time he had passed away, he had gone to 33 foreign countries, helping them both like establish the horse industry or just judging horse shows. So yeah, I could do a show about the horse industry. I know a little bit too much about that. You're talking about, yep, this is it. Central Phoenix City, right across. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. They've played Georgia. It's just that Georgia hasn't gone. Is it that Georgia hasn't gone to Kyle Field, or that the A&M hasn't gone to Athens? It's one of the two, SEC, but they've played each other. It's just that one of them hasn't seen the other's home field. That's the issue. That's the issue. But I'm like a little bit of a goldfish. Getting into this, man, let's just look at this from a blue chip ratio perspective. Oklahoma always is going to have talent. Texas A&M, we can have a lot of questions about Texas A&M. Who's questioning talent? Did you see that defensive line? I understand they had an exodus to the transfer portal. Go check out the 5 stars they still have on that defensive line. It's sickening.
It's disgusting. There should be. I have complaints.
I as well have complaints.
I've been filing them to somebody. I don't know who's going to listen, but yeah, I filed them.
Vanderbilt, look, I hear you, Jay, but this is my thing with Vanderbilt. I'll never forget when they said, "Oh, we're going to show Alabama how to play SEC football," and then they got mollywopped.
Yeah, so you don't say stupid stuff like that. You just don't do things just to do it. You know what I'm saying?
Vanderbilt is Vanderbilt. They're going to Vanderbilt.
They are. Vanderbilt's going to Vanderbilt. So I try to give them a benefit of the doubt, especially what was that a couple years ago when like every SEC school made a bowl game. No, actually every one of them made a bowl game, but Vanderbilt that year. But I digress. They have moments where they can play tough enough, but I don't think that they're going to be a problem for Auburn. Auburn should just destroy them. The rest of these games, though, whew.
This is the thing, man. If you're Auburn, look at this stretch. You have Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, and Kentucky is one of those teams, guys, where we're not going to be talking about Kentucky winning the SEC, but you know what we're going to be talking about? Hey, if you overlook Kentucky, you might have a bad time, right? I'm not saying they're world beaters. That's not my contention. My contention is there are certain teams on the schedule every year, and Texas and OU fans, you will know this better than most because the Big 12 typically has a team or two in the Big 12 where everybody, even from the outside and on the inside, they write off. It's this team. And if you overlook them, you'll have a bad time. It is what it is. That can be Kentucky. So they have Kentucky on the road, then Missouri on the road. This is a brutal schedule if you're Auburn. Let's get into Florida. Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M in the swamp. You gotta love it. I mean, you gotta love it. Look, if you're Florida, you played Georgia every year anyways, right? You played Tennessee every year anyways. So those two matchups, they're nothing new to you. Now you get an LSU, you get a Texas A&M. This is a schedule, man.
Oh, no, it is. And Florida looks out like Texas having only 3 true road games, whereas they have that neutral site game built in there, which helps because of the Georgia, the world's largest cocktail party. And then you have Texas and the Cotton Bowl with the Red River. That's always a neutral site. So they look out this year where they get more technically home games than they do road. And that kind of eases a few things because going that neutral site, I mean, it's a trek for Georgia, just like them, to get over there to that cocktail party, and it's going to make it a dogfight. So,
true, no doubt about it. And then you have Mississippi State, This is going to be a big year for Mississippi State, man. I
We'll
talk
find out
about it
this
all the
season.
time.
This season tells me what they're going to look like in 2024. We talked about this numerous times. I don't know what the coaching staff's going to look like.
I feel dirty
Arnett,
talking
I love
about
him.
Mississippi State every time.
I love Arnett. I think that he's going to be good. Honestly, I was hoping that Oklahoma could have poached him to come over and be our DC. But now he's a head coach. He ain't going nowhere. I still got to see what he looks like.
Jason makes a great point. And I forgot to talk about some of the non-con games, Jason, but we also need to remember Alabama, Jay, they play Wisconsin.
Well. In Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin. And then you look at Florida's schedule. They have UCF, FSU, and Miami.
Hold up. Texas travels to Michigan.
Yeah, no, that's a bucket. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a bucket list game. That's
you get up to Ann Arbor if you can. I might try it, depending on when they play. Actually, that may be the opening weekend.
I am very serious about trying to go to that game. That's a bucket list game. There are certain games when they happen, you're just like, come on. That's one we gotta go see. A&M plays Notre Dame, LSU. Yep, and now we're Texas to Michigan. A&M plays Notre Dame, LSU plays USC and UCLA.
Yep. I put it to you like this. This is the one thing that. So this is the reason why I actually prefer the 8-game schedule for the SEC rather than 9, is so that we get more of these non-conference games like this. I want to see
reasonable
fights.
Completely reasonable.
I want dog fights like this. And that was the one thing I think the SEC had put in the stipulation, that they had to have at least one non-conference game against a Power 5. That's fun. That to me is fun. Now you may play some of the lowlies in the other Power 5s, and fair, they deserve a chance to get dog walked too, but they also have a chance to shock the world. I want to see this Texas game. I want to see. I love to see Oklahoma versus Ohio State again. That was a fun back-to-back series. That was so much fun.
That was great.
With wins on the road for both. It was so much fun. I want to see Alabama. Alabama playing Texas right now as a non-conference, but Bama to Wisconsin. Luke Fickell rebuilding a team. Oh man, Ty, we're gonna get together very soon to talk Wisconsin. So I promise everybody it's gonna happen, because I want it on my channel too. I want to talk a lot more about Wisconsin. I think I'm gonna adopt them as my Big Ten team, but that's what makes this game so much fun. I want to see Oregon go up against like Tennessee. Give me that. You know what I'm saying? Give me Penn State, Oklahoma, because I'd really want to go to Happy Valley so bad.
Yeah, that's another bucket list. Certain
you know
places,
what I'm saying? So
you gotta have them.
Yeah. I want more of that. Give me that and force these schools to play in weird. Give me Georgia at Rutgers. They'll probably destroy them in Georgia and Athens, but they may have a problem up there in New Jersey. That's what you want.
Rutgers is just one of those teams where like people sleep on Rutgers. And then like for a lot of the times you're good on sleeping on Rutgers, but then every now and then
Shiano does it every once in a while, man.
You're like, oh my God, what the hell did Rutgers just do to this team? What happened? And that's Rutgers. So yeah, Florida's schedule is brutal.
They got a tough one. They got a tough SEC schedule.
That's the game that needs to happen. The SEC, we all know it. That needs to happen. That's just good football.
It won't happen in the Lincoln Riley era, because I don't know how much longer Lincoln Riley is going to be there.
That's an interesting conversation, right?
Because I think that the hiring of Cliff Kingsbury, to me, put things on notice.
It very well could. It very well could, and there's a lot of changes on the horizon. It would kind of make sense. Let's look at Georgia, man.
Yes.
You have Auburn at home. Once again, I don't know if Dedicated and Motivated is in here. Georgia fan was watching earlier. You get to play Auburn where you don't have to go to Jordan-Hare Stadium.
Yep.
I've said it 1,000 times. I will say it 1,000 more times. The stadium is cursed. You're always happy. Because Auburn, they will make things happen in that stadium. And hey, you remember as a Bama fan, you have the kick six. As a Georgia fan, you have the situation where the fumbled pass. You remember that one where the ball is knocking over everybody's hands, and then the Auburn guy is just full sprinting, catches it out the air, and goes. Yeah, that's that
was Georgia. That was Georgia. Auburn, wasn't it?
That was Georgia Auburn.
Let me go ahead and make a short out of that one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a heartbreaking moment in college football.
That's Jordan Hare. That's Jordan Hare. We don't talk about that, Keaton. Well, Rob, nobody's claiming that it's going to happen. We just said, if you look at it, it's interesting. There are things moving. It's just a conversation to talk about with USC, right? USC is in a good position moving to the Big Ten. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening for them as well. After you have Auburn, you have the neutral site at Florida. You have Mississippi State. You have Tennessee. You have Alabama, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Texas on the road. So Alabama in Tuscaloosa. I know there was some talk. A lot of Georgia fans wanted that in Athens. It'll be in Athens before you know it. I know Alabama fans have got to be very happy they get Georgia in Tuscaloosa. You get Kentucky, you get Ole Miss, and you get Texas on the road. We'll talk about this when we get to Texas. Another one of those welcome to the SEC moments, right? Where you're playing Georgia off the rip. And this is after Texas will have gone back-to-back years against the Crimson Tide, right? So they get back-to-back years against Alabama right into Georgia. Luckily for Texas fans, you have Tuscaloosa, you have Alabama on the road, and then you get Georgia at home, right? So it does kind of work nicely. It's not like you have Alabama on the road this year, Georgia on the road next year. That'd be brutal. You get to see that that flip-flop. Completely agree with you, the SEC. So happy that game is scheduled. That's awesome. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, because y'all haven't played a regular actual home and home type setup.
With Georgia, it's been, I know that we played in 2015. I want to say 16 or 17, but I'd have to double check on that. But it was around that time whenever they last played them. So Georgia, look, I think Georgia has some games we're going to circle, but I also think Georgia is Georgia, right? For the most part, you get Bama on the road. That's a game we got to circle. You get Texas on the road. Texas is one of those teams that play up to their level of competition every year. And that's just Texas, man. Like Texas does weird things. We got to circle that one. Let's move into Kentucky. Auburn, Georgia, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Florida, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas. This is a tough one.
Yeah, they have a really tough one. I mean, putting in there the Texas, Tennessee, and Georgia games. I mean, you've got three just behemoths. Shane Beamer's doing some stuff at South Carolina, so that one's going to be a lot harder. But luckily, you get him at home. I think that's the thing that helps with the South Carolina game, and you get Auburn at home. That helps. You don't go to Jordan Hare.
Yes,
helps a lot. A lot.
Yes, you don't have to go to Jordan Hare. You get Georgia at home, but you do have to go to the Swamp. That's true. Do have to go to Rocky Top. You do got to go to DKR. You do got to go see Lane Kiffin. So this is an interesting schedule, man. Kentucky, and we got to realize they're in a little bit of a limbo, right? They just came off of a season where they were really turning heads. Where are they going to be? Man, that's an interesting one. This is one I've been dying to get into. LSU.
Let's do it.
Home games against Alabama, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt. On the road against Arkansas, Florida, South Carolina, Texas A&M. Arkansas, LSU, always. I love that game. Right? Yep. I just do. I can't explain to you why. I just do. Getting LSU, Florida in the Swamp. Come on. What more could you want? And then Texas A&M, LSU, another one of those games where weird stuff happens. It just does. That's great. LSU, though, at home, Alabama, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt. What's your thoughts on this?
So looking at this game, man, I bet you LSU really does wish that Vanderbilt and Texas A&M swapped spots.
Yeah.
If there's any game you would prefer to swap, it would probably be those two. Having A&M come to Death Valley and then going to Vandy would have been so much better for them schedule-wise. But they got them. The fact that Vanderbilt has to play road games really upsets a lot of teams. Because I know that it's nice to have them come to your spot. It's so much better to go there, get a quick win, and leave. Even though I do think that Vanderbilt has random upset written all over them sometimes in conference, it usually doesn't happen as much as you would like. But I digress. Having Bama and Oklahoma and Ole Miss at home is probably gonna be the saving grace for the season for Brian Kelly. And I say that because they're gonna spread those games out. They're not gonna be back to back. They'll be probably one in September, one in October, one in November. That way they've got massive games with them, and then they travel and go to everywhere else in between and bring in some cupcakes. They may even have a bye week before either Bama or Oklahoma just to preserve bodies, just in case, or cupcake, because
give them Mercer.
Man, yeah, exactly. Because that's a toughie. That's a tough schedule, and they have what USC? Is it this
USC
is it
and
24?
UCLA?
Oh God,
that's a rough one. It's a great one from a college football fan's perspective. It's great, but yeah, it's a schedule, man. They got some teams.
The good thing for them is that the USC game is neutral site, and that will be Labor Day weekend. It'll be a Sunday night game. And then the UCLA game is in Baton Rouge, so UCLA has to travel to Death Valley.
Yep,
that's about the only thing they got good going for themselves in that one. But yeah, buddy, starting the season with USC and just running wind sprints nonstop, and then the next week is Nichols. So they've got a home cupcake afterwards, and then they've already actually got their September schedule up. You've got USC to start, Nichols at the house, UCLA at the house, and then South Alabama at the house. So I'm thinking October and November is going to have one's going to be Alabama and the other one's going to be Oklahoma. I'm actually curious which one it would be. When they put the actual schedule together, man, that's going to be I'm going to lose my mind then.
Yeah.
I'm going to lose my mind then. Knowing the opponents is cool, but seeing when they actually have to be placed, there's so many trap games that's going to be set up.
That's where it gets interesting. Into Ole Miss, you have Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi State, Oklahoma at home, Arkansas, Florida, LSU, South Carolina on the road. Ole Miss is a team I have several questions on going into 2023. Jay, we talk about it. If you have two quarterbacks, you don't have any. Ole Miss has three. And if you want to say, well, Ty, we could say the same thing about Alabama. I would say you were completely well within your rights in doing so. I said this, and Jay will be the first to admit it because I said it to him. I like a lot of the quarterbacks on Alabama's roster. I think their upside is there. The consistency is not. That needs to come. You don't answer questions. And this is verbatim what I told Jay when it happened.
Yep.
You don't answer questions by bringing in a quarterback at the end of spring. You create more questions. If the questions were answered, you wouldn't bring in a quarterback at the end of spring. That creates more questions. So look, 100% fair if there's an Ole Miss fan that sees that and says, well, couldn't I say the same thing to you as an Alabama fan? Yeah, you could. 100%.
Yeah, Alabama's got like 3 or 4 quarterbacks, and one of them is going to be gone. Now, here we go. Ole Miss, schedule-wise, that Oklahoma and Georgia game at home is going to be a saving grace for them. Because it's probably going to be around maybe some lighter games or maybe a travel game, but they won't have having them at home helps. They also travel to Wake Forest next season. That game is going to be sneaky tough. Sneaky, especially because it's the 14th of September, so it's the third week of the season. Technically, it's technically the second week because the first week is 2 weeks or whatnot, 2 weekends, but it's the second weekend of the season. They've got it surrounded with some cupcakes with Middle Tennessee as well as Georgia Southern, but that Wake Forest game, when they travel there, it's going to be a lot tougher than expected, and then your SEC schedule kicks in. I'm nervous.
Yeah. And I think the best way to describe Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss is it's peak goofiness in college football. It's peak silliness. You don't know what you're going to get at all. And while that might not be a bad thing, if you're playing Ole Miss, you're thinking, oh, well, the uncertainty, we can take advantage of that. No, it almost works against you where they're so you don't know. And they have Judkins. They'll still have Judkins because he'll be a junior. Oh, my God. Judkins will be a junior.
Judkins is going to be a junior, man. That's going to be tough.
Oh, God. He's going to be tough to stop, especially with Lane as the brainchild of that offense. He's a beast. Yeah. Mississippi State. You have Arkansas, Florida, Missouri, A&M at home. You have Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas on the road. like I said, I feel dirty every time I talk about Mississippi State because a legend was just the head coach there. Rest in peace to Mike Leach, an absolute legend. But the reason I say I feel dirty every time I talk about Mississippi State, I have no idea what they're going to be this year. I don't think anybody has any idea what they're going to be this year. And I like Zach Arnett. Jay and I have talked about this. They have a complete changing of philosophy from being a spread Mike Leach offense, air raid, right, to a defensive head coach. A complete flipping in philosophy.
That's going to be...
Yeah. So if we look at the schedule, I think you're very glad that you get an A&M, you get a Florida at home, right? But then you got to go to Georgia. You got to go to Knoxville. You got to go to DKR. Those are 3 tough road games. And not to mention the rivalry where you got to go to Ole Miss.
Yep. Egg Bowl. Last game of the season. Which luckily for them, it's the last game of the season because it was before that. Oh, that was going to be real problems. Yeah. And it's a road game. So you close the season out on the road. We still have a cupcake right before or a bye week, which will help them a lot. But their home slate, it's not helping them at all.
Nothing about this is helping them.
Nothing helps them on that home slate. That road slate is brutal. Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, and good God, that's going to be a dogfight if they can survive it every single game. That's going to be tough. So
great point, man. Great point. And this is why I feel I don't know. I really want Mississippi State to come out good this year. Nothing would make me happier aside from an Alabama national championship. That's neither here nor there. Mississippi State being good this year would put a lot of joy in my heart. I want them to overachieve this year. Let's get into Missouri, man. Because
Missouri I've got to jump. I got to jump and be productive. But I appreciate you having me, Ty. Absolutely. I'll be listening and jumping in the chat.
Absolutely. So this is a team, guys, that Jay and I have talked about at length. Missouri is a team we need to circle. They returned some talent this year. Drinkowitz is there, but let's dive into this. You have Arkansas, Auburn, Oklahoma, Vandy. What do you think about the home schedule, right? You get Oklahoma. Oklahoma's going to be a team we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Auburn, I have questions about. You have Arkansas. We talked about Arkansas. Jay's high on the Razorbacks. I was high on the Razorbacks going into this year and the year before. I almost feel like a scorned ex-girlfriend when it comes to the Arkansas Razorbacks. They burned me twice. And my big problem with them going into 2024 is this. Coming out of 2022 into 2023, their pass defense was horrendous. They lose Drew Sanders. They lose Bumper Pool. Those 2 linebackers did a lot of good work for them. The SEC, where's Jalen Catalon at? I get it. He was hurt for the Razorbacks. I understand. Completely fair point. But also, meet me halfway. What did he do when he was healthy for the Razorbacks? He was an unbelievable player. He's not there anymore. So Arkansas has questions defensively, but the big answer for Arkansas in 2023 is KJ Jefferson, something that will not be an answer for them in 2024. Now, they have quarterbacks they like. They do. What that will look like, I don't know. One thing we have got to acknowledge, guys, it's one thing to have quarterbacks you like. It's one thing to have quarterbacks you have faith in. Do they have college football experience? This is what I mean about the Alabama quarterback situation. I have faith that if Jalen Milroe gets it all together, his ability is otherworldly. Ty Simpson, if everything comes together and the consistency gets there, they're going to be great quarterbacks. Have you played a snap of college football? No, they haven't. Not real Jalen Milroe has, I grant you that. Ty Simpson, he hasn't started a game. We can talk about this for several different quarterbacks. For Arkansas, though, they don't have the talent that Alabama does to fall back on. So that's why I'm super interested. Auburn, there are so many questions about Auburn. We're going to realize a lot of what the Tigers are this year under Hugh Freeze, and then we'll be able to take a step back and reevaluate this situation. I joke time and time again about Jordan Hare being cursed, and it's not really a joke. It absolutely is. But at the same time, this is a team that can build. We know what Hugh Freeze can do. We know what he can do. When he's locked in and coaching, he can upset some people. So Auburn's a team we have to watch. Then Missouri gets Oklahoma at home. Oklahoma coming into the SEC, reuniting with an old Big 12 foe. I think Oklahoma's going to want to have something to prove, especially to a team that was just in the Big 12. not too long ago. Crazy that it's been almost 10 years. That just doesn't seem right. A little side note, I remember my first year at UNT, Missouri's first year in the SEC, and we were all over at one of my fraternity brothers' apartments watching Missouri versus Alabama in the SEC championship game. A wild time, right? I mean, who would have thought Missouri was a really good team, though? I digress, right? Oklahoma gets to reunite with a former Big 12 foe. I think they're going to be locked and loaded, ready to go, really excited for this game. Let's look at this away slate, though, because you have Alabama. That's rough. You have Mississippi State. We just talked about Mississippi State. I have my questions there. We have South Carolina. We'll talk about South Carolina here in a little bit. I also have my questions about the Gamecocks, though Beamer is doing some good work. And you have Texas A&M. We know what kind of year this is for Texas A&M. I know what Jimbo's contract extension says. There's no way they can continue trending in the direction they're trending and things be A-okay. There's no way. I refuse to believe it. So this is a big year for A&M. Let's skip forward. Oklahoma. Now we're getting into the meat of which I want to hear. Oklahoma has Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Auburn, LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri. OU fans, you've got to love this. Think about this from a storyline perspective. You come to the SEC, you get Alabama coming to Norman. Awesome, right? South Carolina, you have the connection with Shane Beamer. Another storyline, boom. Tennessee, you have Heupel. You have the connection there. Storyline, boom. You get the Cotton Bowl. That'll never go away. It should never go away. It needs to be exactly what it is. Exactly what it is. And I have a little bit of something I found that y'all will enjoy. Let me grab this real fast. Y'all are going to enjoy this. My first college football game, because I've told y'all time and time before that my dad was a big-time Nebraska fan. And he knew that I was a big-time Alabama fan. And so his favorite team was going to play my favorite team's rival. 2007 Cotton Bowl. First college football game I ever went to. Nebraska versus Auburn. Still have the tickets in here. Everything. Also have a little banquet thing signed by Terry Bradshaw from when I worked at his event in high school. But yes, right? So Cotton Bowl, it's an unbelievable place. Unbelievable football venue. Needs to stay there. Absolutely in the pantheon of college football history is the Cotton Bowl. It needs to stay. That's a very special place to me. Let's get into the away. Oklahoma, you all get to understand what I mean when I say Jordan Hare is cursed. May God have mercy on all of your souls. Then you have LSU, you have Ole Miss, and you have Missouri. I mean, come on, guys. Look, tough schedule. I grant you this. But if you're a fan of college football, in the same year, you get to watch the Sooners play Alabama, Tennessee, Auburn, Ole Miss, LSU, and Texas with South Carolina. Man, that's a schedule. But you know what it's going to mean? Every Saturday. You thought you were glued to the TV before? You're going to be real glued to the TV. And Big 12 fans, Texas OU fans who are coming in here, this is what we as SEC fans kept talking about. Our contention is not that you're going to play Georgia, Bama, LSU, Georgia, Bama, LSU. It's just that whenever you sit down and start looking at the SEC slate, you're like, oh, wow, we do have some teams we're going to have to line up and play. It's awesome. Awesome. I can't wait for Texas and Oklahoma to make their move to the SEC. Going to be unbelievably welcome additions to what's the best league in college football, the SEC. Let's go ahead to South Carolina. I've said this before. I'm not going to have fun watching us get blown out. I don't know that y'all will get blown out, right? You'll lose. You'll lose some games, but you're also still rebuilding. You're still in a rebuild. Year 3 under Brent Venables is going to be a big one. It just so happens that year 3 will come in the SEC. But he'll have a little bit more recruiting base. He'll have a little bit more development under him at OU. The staff will have a little bit more continuity. So it's still going to be a learning process, Thomas. I grant you that. But Oklahoma historically is a big brand. And I've always been of the mindsets that big brands that have kind of stood the tests of history will remain as they are. Whether they have down periods or not, that's remaining to be seen. Okay, well, look. even though we might disagree, if that's your position, then I can't say it's unreasonable. I might not agree with your position, but framing your position with that, fair enough. Fair play to you. Completely fair play to you. My big questions for South Carolina are as follows, guys. They lost two big pieces to the transfer portal. They did some good work in the transfer portal. They got one of the most freaky players in the class of 2023, Nicholas Harbor, but Spencer Rattler won't be there anymore. That's going to be an interesting situation. What's the quarterback situation look like? And this is a conversation, a theme that if you've been paying attention, you'll recognize that we see in the SEC in 2024. What's the quarterback situation going to be? I mean, goodness gracious, how many times have we already asked this question? We asked it with Alabama. We asked it with Arkansas. We asked it with Auburn. Florida, I mean, DJ Lagway coming in, he might take over the reins as a true freshman. But once again, we're getting to the conversation of I'm not questioning DJ Lagway's talent. I'm just stating the fact that he doesn't have college football experience. So we have the conversation about Florida. Georgia may have a quarterback coming back in 2024. Depends who they start in 2023. We'll have that conversation maybe about LSU, but at least with LSU, we know what Nussmeier is. Ole Miss, who knows? So you see the point I'm making, right? Oklahoma, even. If Dylan Gabriel starts this year, I'm not questioning Jackson Arnold's talent. I got to watch him live multiple times. He played a hop, skip, and a jump from where I sit talking to you all right now. I'm not questioning the talent. Doesn't have college football experience. So you see this question raise its head time and time again. And that's why when Jay was on, I said, this is a double-edged sword. It is something that's a negative against an Arkansas, against a South Carolina, but at the same time, how many other teams can we point to? So let's dive into this. South Carolina, you have LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri, Texas A&M, all your home games on the road, Bama, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Vandy. Well, you got to go to Tuscaloosa. You got to go to Norman. Those are two games that we will all be circling, no doubt about it. But let's look at this home slate, guys. LSU, that's a tough game, but you're happy you get LSU in your home environment. Ole Miss, once again, Ole Miss is a wild card. You'd much rather play Ole Miss at home than on the road. And Texas A&M, once again, if you're going to play Texas A&M anywhere, it's going to be at home. That's where you're going to want to play them. Kyle Field is a little bit like Jordan-Hare, where wild things happen, but not to the same degree. But it is a very loud stadium. It can be a hostile environment. Great place to play if you're Texas A&M. Let's move on. Tennessee. They get Alabama at home, Florida at home, Kentucky at home, Mississippi State at home, and we'll play Arkansas, Georgia, Oklahoma, Vandy on the road. Here's the thing about Tennessee. Florida, Kentucky, right, Alabama, and Georgia, they're not going to know the difference, as well as Vanderbilt. They're not going to know the difference in those games right there. That's your SEC East. Boom, right there. So for Tennessee, you're looking at the situation saying, okay, so outside of that, we get Mississippi State, we get Arkansas, and we get Oklahoma. Okay, that sounds good. And where do we get Mississippi State? Oh, we get Mississippi State at home. Okay, this is an interesting situation. And for Tennessee, you have a guy right now that the coaches have a lot of faith in because he has some college football experience, not to the same degree we just saw from Hendon Hooker. But you also recruited someone who personally, I let it be known, was one of my favorite prospects in the class of 2023, Nicholas Iamaleava, right? Nicholas Iamaleava, real high ceiling. I think he'll sit this year, come out in 2024. So Tennessee is an interesting team. They're away slate. You get Georgia in Georgia. You get Oklahoma in Norman. Right. And this is a theme you're noticing. Oklahoma is getting a lot of these games in Norman. That's what you want to see. Now, granted, you do have to go to Death Valley. You do have to go to Ole Miss. You do have to go to Jordan-Hare. If I'm ranking some of the most hostile stadiums in the SEC, Oklahoma, you hit 2 of the 5 easily. Jordan-Hare is a little bit of a special one to me because I'm an Alabama fan, so that is what it is. But Death Valley, I don't think there's anybody who would give me a moment's worth of debate that Death Valley isn't a top 5 environment in the SEC. I think I could easily argue it's a top 5 in college football. That is what it is. Let's go on to Texas. Texas gets Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi State at home. They will be going on the road for Arkansas, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt. You see me omit Oklahoma. We all know that's not a real road game. That's a neutral site game. Hell, at this point for both of those teams, that's a second home, right? They know that area. They know the drill. That game, go ahead and forget about that one in terms of this conversation we're about to have. As a top 4 class. Oh, okay. No, I'm sorry. So if we look at Texas, you get Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi State at home. Once again, guys, if you're coming into the SEC, if we're looking at this, Texas's toughest game coming into the SEC is Georgia. They get Georgia at home. I think if you're a Texas fan, you've got to love that because you're going to be replacing Quinn. I think it'll be Malik, but you'll be replacing Quinn. So getting Georgia in DKR, that's big. And especially, like I said, if you're a Texas fan, I think you've got to love that you've almost been being prepped for this moment. You played Alabama in Austin. You're going to play Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And then the year after, you get Georgia in Austin. You've almost been prepped for this moment. And getting Georgia in Austin your first year in the SEC, I think you got to love it. The Arkansas game with Texas, Shadow, really interested in hearing from you on this. I'm going to be circling that game every single year. I'm going to be circling that game every single year that Texas is in the SEC. I think that is going to be a great game. And I don't think it's going to be talked about, which is why I'm giving it the attention I'm giving it right now. Everybody's going to talk about Texas A&M, and we'll get into that. But Arkansas is that's going to be a fun game. It kind of is, Keaton. I'm not going to lie to you. It kind of is. Yeah, it's a little funny, but it is what it is. The game everybody's going to be talking about, I talk about Georgia because I think it's just interesting the way it worked, but there's no bigger storyline for the Texas Longhorns than Texas A&M playing at Kyle Field. I've talked about it several times. That's a hostile place to play. That is a hostile place to play. It gets loud. Wild stuff happens there. And this is a game that not only SEC fans will be watching, not only Texas college football fans will be watching, regardless of affiliation. This is going to carry a very heavy regional audience and a national audience. But this game is so interesting because even being a resident of the state of Texas, for these two teams to have not played, you would think that these two teams go at it the way there's this friction between the fan bases. Getting that back, I don't care who you're a fan of. If you are within the limits of this state, you're going to be paying attention that day. I promise you. I promise you, you can take it to the bank right now. That game will be circled. We'll have a conversation about that at a later date. Can't wait for that to get back and going. Think about this, guys. This move, OU and Texas to the SEC, is so impactful because we get to keep one of the biggest rivalries in college football. OU and Texas. And also get to add in other great rivalries. Reignite Texas, Texas A&M. Come on. Why not? Why not? Unbelievable. I cannot tell you how pumped up I am for this SEC schedule. It's great. This is exactly why I've been so pumped up whenever Oklahoma and Texas announced they were coming to the SEC. You cannot add in two of the biggest brands in college football and not be excited. More eyes, more recruiting, more views, more intrigue, more storylines. What's not to love? Let's move forward to Texas A&M because we do have two other topics we're going to touch on before we get up out of here today. Texas A&M, Arkansas is that neutral site game. Go ahead and put that over to the side as we do all neutral site games. You have LSU, Missouri, Texas A&M. LSU, Texas A&M is another one of those games. We need to start building this up as a rivalry. Okay, and maybe this is me. There are certain games within the SEC that I think are kind of new age rivalries, and we need to embrace them. With the shifting landscapes of college football, we too must be able to embrace some changes. We went from a computer selecting who would play for a national championship to a 4-team playoff to now a 12-team playoff and two of the biggest brands in college football joining the SEC. Is it not time we start thinking about taking advantage of some of these storylines. Look, Texas A&M and Texas, that's going to be an instant rivalry. Texas A&M and LSU, they have great games when they play each other. This to me seems like it has the makings of a new age rivalry. I said the same thing about Alabama LSU. God, if I was the SEC, anytime they played, I'd be stoking the flames of this new age rivalry. This new age rivalry. Yeah, the second Nick Saban left LSU for Alabama, yeah, I'd have been all over that if I was their marketing team. You bet your bottom dollar. You bet your sweet bippy. So I can't wait for that LSU game. Going to be one of the best. If you're A&M, you love who you get at home. Inevitably, you're going to have tough road games. What's their tough road game? They go to the Swamp. I grant you that. The Swamp is a tough place to play. They go to Jordan Hare. I'm not going to say it again. I'm going to spare you all. Other than that, they go to Mississippi State. I have my questions about Mississippi State. I've said it again. And then they have South Carolina. I have my questions about South Carolina. I think South Carolina is a very interesting team for 2023, even more interesting for 2024 because of my questions. And finally, we get into Dandy Vandy. Dandy Vandy, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas are the home games. Away you have Auburn, Kentucky, LSU, Missouri. Look, it's Vanderbilt. I want them to be good, but Vanderbilt is Vanderbilt. This is a brutal schedule in terms of you have to play Alabama, Tennessee, and Texas at home. It is what it is, right? Yes, you're happy you get them at home, but it's not like it would have made much of a difference if you get them away. And to Jay's point earlier, I do want to highlight this because Jay made a phenomenal point here, and I think it needs to be doubled down. If you're Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, or Texas, you're happy that one of your road games is Vanderbilt. That might as well be a home game for you. You feel very good about you going in there and your ability to win that game. You'd much rather get one of your road games as Vanderbilt than Vanderbilt be one of your home games. I'm going to pose this one to you, Texas fans. The Texas fans that are in the chat right now. I want to pose this one to you. How differently do you feel about your schedule if I flip Vanderbilt and Georgia? You get Georgia in Athens, but you get Vanderbilt in Austin. You see my point? Yeah, things shift, right? You love that you get the Vanderbilt Commodores at their home place. Now, on the road, they have Auburn, Kentucky, LSU, Missouri. Auburn, LSU, not friendly places to play. Kentucky is one of those teams we talk about all the time. What are you going to get with Kentucky? We don't know. They lost their offensive line coach. They lost some offensive linemen. Florida took advantage of them losing some offensive linemen. Got to watch what that Florida offensive line looks like, because that's going to be the keys to the Ferrari for Billy Napier in 2023, that offensive line. I have major questions about Florida's quarterback situation in 2023, but know this. They have some running backs that are very talented. Etienne's little brother, really talented. That offensive line comes together. That's going to be a fun bunch. LSU, look, Nussmeier's there. We know how the Tigers recruit. And Brian Kelly's just going to be deeper into his time there. Really going to be a team to see. And then Missouri. Eli Drinkowitz, Missouri returns a lot of talent in 2023. If they can build some foundations, look, if we look at the recruiting bed, Missouri has had some talent coming out of the state now. A bit more than even I think some people would realize. They've had the talent coming out of the state. But, they have to capitalize. That's asking a lot. Especially whenever we're saying that the big question I have for Missouri isn't in 2023. My big question for Missouri is 2024 and what happens in 2024. You get two big brands coming into the SEC. That doesn't make it easier on Missouri. Makes it more difficult. Let's get into some comments here before we get into our final topics. Right? I have been having to miss some comments because just the nature of our conversation. Tra Conway, you say Alabama's schedule is tough. It is, but it's fun. It's going to be great. Thank you, Kim. If the ACC implodes, who, if any, does the SEC take in? Dundee's, I would love to complete. This is just me personally. There's a few teams from the ACC that I think you try and get. Obviously, you already have Florida. Why not go ahead and get all the major Florida brands, Florida State and Miami? I think that'd be great. And then you ask the question, what happens with Clemson? South Carolina's already in the SEC. It just seems like it'd make an easy connection for Clemson to go to the SEC. And, that's 3 teams. So what are you going to do with the 4th? North Carolina is a team I'd love to see in the SEC, but they just feel more like a Big Ten team to me. Jay and I have talked about this a lot. They just feel like a Big Ten team. So yeah, no, if the ACC implodes, I think first Clemson obviously is the answer because of what Dabo has built there, the brand they carry on a national stage, the recruiting prowess they bring to the table. But you can't ignore the Florida schools. When we talk about a collection of talent at any given state, Florida is as talent rich as anybody, and you have 3 major brands in that state. Florida, now with UCF at Power 5 level, it would just make sense to go ahead and try and monopolize as much as you can that state as the SEC. Yeah, UCF gives access to the Big 12. It is what it is. But yeah, I think you try and monopolize the state of Florida. Absolutely. Miami and Florida State in the SEC would be fantastic. Florida State in the SEC would be fantastic. I'd love that. But I'm also a nerd when it comes to football. So I'd be very easy to please. That's, Vandy 2024 SEC champs. You heard it here first. You've heard it here first. Petrino should be able to lead A&M to a few wins in 2024. Yeah, look, that is Josh Pate, as always, right? Had an unbelievable bit on this. As always, I go check it out. But we got to give credit where it's due. This is Josh Pate's bit, certainly not mine. He was talking about how Petrino as the heel in college football is a good thing, and it might be just what A&M needs to kind of embrace it. Just be like, yeah, we'll be the heel. We'll be the heel. And Petrino is kind of a step in that direction. And I thought that was a fantastic argument because it's something you hear in fighting all the time. Who's the heel? Give you a great example of this right now for any of my UFC fans in the chat. Amanda Nunes retired this past weekend. And if you've been keeping up with anything in the women's UFC division, you'll know Juliana Pena she is not happy. Not happy at all. She's talked about it several times. She wanted the rematch. It was supposed to be a rematch between Nunes and Pena this weekend. Pena gets hurt. Aldana comes in. It is what it is. The reason I bring that up, right? The reason it's important is because now Juliana Pena is on this tirade. And she's saying some delusional things. Let's just call it what it is, delusional. Being like, I'm the best women's fighter of all time. She doesn't hold any wins over an active UFC fighter because Amanda Nunes retired. But do you know what it does do? Amanda Nunes is gone. Juliana Pena is going full heel, and it might be the best thing that could happen to the women's division. How many views do those videos have? People are watching. If I would have polled any UFC fan in here and said, when Amanda Nunes retires, what do you think the state of that division will be for like the first 6 months? You'd probably say stagnant because that's the best fighter we've seen in that division ever. Gone. But Juliana Pena is going full heel, and it might be the best thing for that division. SEC, I love this comment because it reminds me of Josh Pate's thought on this, that Petrino going to A&M will embrace the full heel mentality, and maybe that's what A&M needs. Maybe that's what A&M needs. Yeah, Oliveira did ruin Benil Dariush, and I didn't know how to feel about that because I like both of them. But Dubronk's made easy work of Dariush. Easy work. All right, let's get into some of my last topics for today. Let's get into a must-land prospect for Alabama. Guys, if you didn't know, I am now featured on every Tuesday evening, the Bama Standard Show, The Final Whistle, featuring former Alabama wide receiver Matt Caddell, former Alabama defensive back Chris James, Final Whistle Dan, myself, Justin Riley, and Coach Smook, talking all things Alabama. But a few weeks ago, we were talking about must-land prospects for the Crimson Tide, and I gave Alabama fans 2. Now, I'm only going to talk about one today because I talked about one of them yesterday, Riddick, the 5-star linebacker located in the state of Alabama, currently committed to the Georgia Bulldogs. That's a must-land prospect. It just absolutely is. You don't want a 5-star linebacker going to Kirby Smart, not from your backyard. I talk about this all the time. You're not going to win every recruiting battle, but you have to win the ones you can't afford to lose, right? Like, that's the big thing. That's how you have to weigh recruiting. You have to win the battles you can't afford to lose. They need that win. But the guy that I would put at number one for the 2024 cycle for the Crimson Tide is none other than Julian Sayin. Currently competing at the Elite 11 right now. And if we look, no matter what publication we look to, whether it's On3, whether it's 24/7 Sports, Rivals, ESPN, you name it, there are 3 quarterbacks that have come in the top 5 of all rankings. Julian Sayin is one of them. Now, he's not the only one we need to talk about. But in the context of this conversation, then we'll get into Elite 11. In the context of this conversation, to me, Julian Sayin is just about as much of a must-land prospect for the Crimson Tide as there is. And I'm going to give you several reasons why. First and foremost, what do we talk about all the time when we talk about recruiting? If you get a quarterback, they can snowball your recruiting class. We can give countless examples of this time and time again. I can go back to the class of 2022 where Arch Manning commits to Texas. We see an avalanche right after. Arch Manning was hitting the trail. He was hitting the phone lines. We can go back to Caleb Williams at Oklahoma. Whenever he committed, Oklahoma was in a situation, actually college football was in a situation where they couldn't do anything because of the pandemic. It was up to the prospects to really take the load on their back and carry it. That's what they did. Caleb Williams did a phenomenal job. Phenomenal job. So there are certain guys, right, that they kind of will carry things. They don't have to be quarterbacks. They can be a running back. Last year, Richard Young for Alabama, ferocious on the recruiting trail. And I completely agree with you. Jalen Mbakwe is unbelievable. Guys, go check out his highlight tape. It is wild why he doesn't get more national attention. He was almost on that list, Thomas, no doubt about it. But I'm going to get you into reason number 2, because that's a great point to get me into that, Thomas. Reason number 2, and the big reason why Julian Sayin is the biggest prospect for the Crimson Tide in the class of 2024. What happened after spring ball? Alabama brings in a quarterback from the transfer portal. Now, if we go back and watch Tyler Buchner versus South Carolina, I can show you throws and drives where you're going to be very impressed. Very impressed. The problem is consistency. Let's be very honest here. That's the issue. I can have that same argument about the quarterbacks that were already on roster for Alabama. If you bring a quarterback in at the end of spring, you're admitting that you have some questions. Now, that being said, bringing that quarterback in can answer the questions. It can make it to where that guy is just the one. He's going to get it together and he's going to take the reins, or it'll light a fire under somebody that now there's something different. Now there's someone else here. It'll light a fire under somebody. So it can help answer questions, but inevitably it creates more questions. Julian Sayin answers questions. Make no mistake about it. The addition of Tyler Buchner, no matter how we slice this, created questions. Once again, important to note here, those questions can be answered because of Tyler Buchner's presence. Whether that means he takes the job or whether that means he lights a fire under one of the guys currently there. They can be answered. But initially, it creates a question. Julian Sayin answers the questions. There is no doubt about that. Currently a top 15 prospect in the nation, coming in at number 11, the number 2 quarterback in the nation, and I believe the number 1 player in the state of California. I don't have any of that in front of me. That's just the last time I looked at it, but it's California. They always have 5 stars. So I think he's number 1. He might be the number 2 player in the state of California. Either way, 5-star prospect at the Elite 11 is showing out. Every camp we've heard, we know he is a very gifted prospect. That is a must-land prospect for the Crimson Tide. Alabama fans have become accustomed to the offense doing a lot of work, and I'm not saying that's going to go away, but expect the defense to really start showing more forms of the Alabama defenses of old. But in the modern era, we cannot disregard what offense means to college football. Look, you can even talk to me about Georgia. Oh, Georgia had Stetson Bennett. They went full pro style. How many points did Georgia hang on TCU? I'm not saying they were the number 1 offense in college football. They weren't a bottom offense in college football either. They finished as a top offense. So you can't disregard offense, nor can you disregard defense. I mean, it's an unbelievable phenomenon we're watching, right? Who would have thought you have to be balanced to win? Crazy concept, I know, but it's just the truth. It's just the truth of the matter. You have to have some level of balance to win unless you have a cheat code. And we've only seen so many of those in college football. We've only seen so many cheat codes in college football. Now, before we, I didn't want to be the one to say it, SEC, but you're 100% right. 100% right. Before we move on to the final little topic we'll talk about today, I did want to give a few notes on Elite 11 because, like I said, Julian Sand, one of the names you're hearing about a lot. There's a quarterback for Florida State, though. Florida State prospect, and I am so sorry if there's any Florida State fans watching. I looked up his name and how to say it, but that was an hour, almost 2 hours ago at this point. I'm going to butcher this, and I apologize in advance. Luke Kromenhoek, currently committed to Florida State. Now, this is a top 200 prospect in the nation, but if you listen to the guys at Elite 11 right now, they're saying, hey, he's looking good. Do you want to know why this is such an interesting prospect? Genuinely, everybody in chat right now circled the name. He was just a wide receiver and safety, playing high-level high school football in the state of Georgia. Let me repeat that. The man is a top 200 player in all of high school football, coming in at number 131 in the nation. He is a top 10 quarterback in all of high school football, coming in at number 10. And he was just a wide receiver and a safety, standing 6'4.5". Yeah, that fires me up. That's awesome. That's the type of storyline where I hear about it, I'm like, I got to talk about it. How could you not talk about it? Because as a college football fan, why would you not want to hear about that? Kid is out here doing it all. That's awesome. And to hear that he is showing out at Elite 11, if you are a Florida State fan, I know you are really excited. Really excited. Florida State's a team where Norvell, we're going to be watching them closely in 2023. But to hear him being a name lauded, awesome to hear. Of course, you hear Dylan Raiola. I don't think anybody in the nation is surprised to hear the name Dylan Raiola. But then you also hear about the Penn State prospect showing out. You hear about Jaden Davis, the Michigan prospect showing out. A lot of good quarterbacks. We're going to have to keep up with the Elite 11. But finally, we need to get into the last little topic of today, the ChampU BBQ, because Oklahoma is hosting a mega event this weekend filled with some prospects that, dare I say, or can't miss. And we're going to start with the prospects that probably fit into that classification. We're not going to talk about everybody that's going to be in attendance. We'd be here for far too long, and we'll talk more about that this evening on the JP and Trav show, which Jay and I will be featured on. But we are going to go through some names that stand out to me, and I think that there are conversations we need to have. We're going to start with the defensive line. David Stone, Dominic McKinley, Nigel Smith, Joseph Jonah Ajonye. Two of those guys are 5 stars in David Stone, Dominic McKinley. Two of them high value 4 stars, Nigel Smith, Joseph Jonah Ajonye. Let's start with David Stone. I've said this before. I'll say it again. This might be the must-land prospect for Oklahoma. I talk about Riddick and I talk about Julian Sand for Alabama. This might be it for Oklahoma. And why is easy. You got your 5-star quarterback last year. Check. Done. You were supposed to have your 5-star defensive lineman last year, and you got a 5-star edge in Adebawore. No doubt. We're talking interior. Hicks ended up going to A&M. It is what it is, right? It happened. Now there's David Stone. And this is truly a must-land prospect. He has great relationships with the Oklahoma staff from the state of Oklahoma. I understand he's rated as a player in Florida because he plays with IMG, but from Oklahoma. And this is a weekend where Oklahoma wants to kind of put it in stone, if you get my pun, that he will be a Sooner. He's a top 5 prospect in the nation. He's the number 2 defensive lineman in the nation, top 5 player in the state of Florida. And the biggest need Oklahoma has is the interior of the defensive line. And Oklahoma fans, they're letting their frustrations be known. Countless questions being asked about none other than Todd Bates, a guy that I've had nothing but good things to say. And while I absolutely think a lot of the complaints on Todd Bates are premature, let's get one thing understood now. This is a hungry fan base. I don't think that the complaints are 100% warranted because I think when we look at who they're losing battles to, they're losing battles to really good teams. We talked about Jordan Renaud picking Alabama over Oklahoma. Guys, if you're Jordan Renaud and you're sitting on your couch and Todd Bates is in your living room and then the next guy in is Freddie Roach, I mean, Todd Bates is an incredible defensive line coach. Nothing taken away from him. So is Freddie Roach. Freddie Roach is that dude. So Oklahoma, they've been in battles. I understand the frustrations. They haven't won, but the frustrations are being shown more and more with every battle they don't win. And with every battle they don't win, there's less to argue against it, except that it's only been a year. I still think the complaints are way premature. Landing David Stone erases all of that, every bit of it. He is the must land prospect for Oklahoma. Now, we talked about this the other day whenever Zadavian Sims committed to Oregon. We talked about this whenever Derek LeBlanc entered the transfer portal. And I will say this before we move on to Dominic McKinley. It's football. Like I just said, you're not going to win every recruiting battle. And unfortunately, things happen. Players transfer. It happens. It really sucks that it was an interior defensive line guy with that high of a ceiling that transferred. But things happen. It just makes every battle you're after that much more important. Like David Stone was already an important prospect, a must-land prospect, but now that you lost out on Zadavian Sims, now that Derek LeBlanc isn't there, you got to have him. Got to have the interior defensive line. And hey, Shadow, you're right. Texas needs that interior defensive line as well, in a big way. In a big way. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. Yeah, I mean, SEC, don't get me wrong. If I had a crystal ball, which nobody's going to pay me to have a crystal ball, but if I had a crystal ball, it'd be inserted in favor of the Oklahoma Sooners for David Stone. I think there are a few teams to watch, but I do think that there is a clear separation between Oklahoma and those teams as we currently sit here and talk. But as I said, LeBlanc leaving, it is what it is. It's football. The transfer portal giveth, the transfer portal taketh. I'm going to trademark a few sayings. Moving the needle in the transfer portal giveth and taketh. Because if y'all have heard them once on my channel, you've heard them 1,000 times. But it makes the battle for David Stone, Joseph Jonier, Nigel Smith, Dominic McKinley all the more important. And speaking of Dominic McKinley, you're talking about going into the state of Louisiana and landing a defensive lineman. That's tough. This is highlighting the conversation we just had. I understand there are fans that are frustrated with Todd Bates. Who are you losing these battles to? Zadavian Sims chose Dan Lanning in Oregon. Oregon's a good team. They are. Dan Lanning's a good defensive-minded coach. That's just one of those battles where what if the kid just wanted to see something new? That's a completely reasonable thing, something we hear time and time again in recruiting. I loved that staff. I wanted to see something new. It's that simple. Going up against LSU for Dominic McKinley, that's going up against LSU for any prospect in Louisiana. We all know what a daunting time that is. But luckily, Todd Bates has been in on Dominic McKinley for a while. Once again, if Dominic McKinley chooses LSU, understand how difficult it is to recruit a guy out of LSU that the Tigers really want. And they really want Dominic McKinley. I gave you the example when we first started this of the prospect that committed to Colorado on a visit, loved his time with the Buffaloes, went back to Colorado, talked about how he had a great time, ended up decommitting and committing to LSU. Why? That's the power of the LSU brand to kids in that state. It is a really tough place to recruit. So this is one of those things, right? Where if Bates doesn't land him, we'll see people talking, oh, Todd Bates can't recruit. There's the nuance to that conversation is incredibly important. Who did he lose the battle against? Where's the kid from? Oh, the kid's from Louisiana, a hop, skip, and a jump away. And LSU got him? Oh, okay. Well, I mean, hell, Bama was in on the kid too. Everybody was. So it's not just OU. That's a tough place to recruit. So Dominic McKinley is a name we have to watch, but Todd Bates was in on the ground floor on Dominic McKinley, has a great relationship. And we talked about this with Clemson. There's a reason why I wanted to bring it up with Clemson, because I thought it'd be a nice way for us to start the stream and end the stream. There wasn't 33 people in here when we did it, but I'll repeat. Whenever you put your ear to the ground and start listening to what people are saying, what these prospects are saying, you'll notice themes. Whenever you hear them talk about Clemson, there's a word, and there might be different variations of the word, but it's the word. That's culture. What's the culture like? Everybody who leaves from that place raves about the culture. What Dabo has done there is unbelievable. You put your ear and listen to Oklahoma, you hear relationships. You hear relationships time and time again. I'm not saying that's unique to Oklahoma, and I'm certainly not saying culture is unique to Clemson. I'm just saying notice the buzzwords and start associating the buzzwords. Because after you hear them a few times, there's something. Relationships is the word I want you to associate with the Oklahoma Sooners. And relationships is the name of the game for Todd Bates in this battle for Dominic McKinley because they have that relationship. And speaking of relationships, what about Nigel Smith? Top 100 prospect in the nation, coming in number 83, number 12 defensive lineman, number 16 in the state of Texas. He's coming off of some visits to Ohio State. You get him back. Once again, same thing I said with David Stone. This is a perfect opportunity for Oklahoma's biggest event of the year for them to put the stamp on it. Same can be said for Joseph Jonah Ajonye. Now, this is interesting. He comes in as the number 40 prospect in the nation, number 7 defensive lineman, number 10 in the state of Texas. He's coming off of a visit to Georgia that he really liked. So much so that crystal balls have been inserted in the Dogs' favor for Joseph Jonah Ajonye. And once again, we ask the question, if you lose the battle, what's the nuance to the conversation? Who'd you lose it to? Oh, Georgia? The team that's gone back-to-back national championships, the team that has sent an entire boatload of guys to the NFL in 2 years? How do you argue with their recruiting pitch? Seriously. I mean, if you have a way to do it, you can say, oh, you'll be on the depth chart. You'll be buried on the depth chart. And you might be right, but understand this. Nick Saban had an interesting point about this once when he was talking about coaches that would go to a 5-star that Alabama wanted, and they'd say, hey, why are you going to go to Alabama? You're not going to get to play there. Come here. You'll play. And Nick Saban is like, do these coaches not realize they're telling these kids you're not good enough to play at Alabama? Like, whether you realize it or not, that's the notion being said. Hey, I don't believe you're good enough to play at Alabama, but you can come play here. Kind of a double-edged sword, no? Right? If you really start thinking about it, it's kind of a double-edged sword. And the other part of this conversation, Nick Saban didn't point out, but I'm going to point out, how many guys just play 1 or 2 years at Alabama and Georgia and then go to the NFL? Tons. There are certain places where you don't need a whole lot of time. And that's why I want to bring this up. OU is in a really good place with a lot of these battles, but I understand there's frustrations on not landing some of these interior defensive linemen. You need to understand OU didn't have a perfect season last year, and they're losing guys to Georgia, Alabama, teams where, what do you argue against their pitch? There isn't an argument against their pitch. Unfortunately, there isn't. That's why they've maintained. But for OU to be in this, I think it's a great thing. Getting Joseph Jonah Ajonye after the visit to Georgia to go to Oklahoma is big. Very big. He's feeling the visit to Georgia. You want to get him in. One thing I always talk about, you'll always see me say this. If there's a player that Alabama's in on, that Oklahoma's in on, and they really want, if you can get the last visit, and I'm not saying they do get the last visit, but if you can get the last visit, you always feel a little bit better. The reason why I bring that up in relation to Oklahoma and Joseph Jonah Ajonye, he's feeling the visit to Georgia, taking the visit to Oklahoma. This is where you can make up that ground. And what did we just talk about the name of the game is for Oklahoma? Relationships. And one thing we can talk about with relationships is authenticity. Right? Synonyms. People are attracted to authenticity. So something we have got to watch. Let's get into some running backs, right? Because we have 2 running backs I want to talk about for Oklahoma. We've talked about the defensive linemen that I wanted to talk about. Those are the 4 names. Look, I think OU needs at least 3 big defensive line lands this year, with one of them being David Stone and one of them being Nigel Smith. You get those 2. Any other one you get, you're very happy with. But I think at a minimum, those are 2 names you need. That's just, and David Stone, I think, is the must-land prospect only because of what happened with the Hicks situation. And the move to the SEC is right there. Get you the transfer if they get upset. True, SEC. And that's why you want to maintain these great relationships. Great point, SEC. The transfer portal opens up a whole other conversation for us, no doubt about it. And I almost had completely forgotten about it. So thank you very much for bringing that up. Let's get into the running backs. 2 running backs we're going to talk about. Taylor Tatum, number 33 in the nation, number 1 running back, number 9 in the state of Texas, coming off a visit to USC. What did I just talk about with Joseph Jonah Ajonye? You have a guy coming off of a visit that they loved, had a great time per all reports. You would much rather them come to your place next than having left your place having a great time and then gone to Georgia and then gone to USC and had a stellar time. Recency bias is a very, very, very real thing. A very, very real thing. Oklahoma's after Taylor Tatum, Caden Durham, really hard. Taylor Tatum coming from the visit to USC, where Lincoln Riley and the Trojans really impressed. Anytime you have storylines, Oklahoma versus USC, I'm going to be following. Why? Because it's interesting. It's dramatic. It's interesting. It makes for great storylines. It just is. Here's one thing I've said time and time again when it comes to Oklahoma and the running back room. We talk about pitches that are impossible to argue against, right? I find myself questioning how you argue against a DeMarco Murray pitch. And I have maintained this point for a very long time. DeMarco Murray has one of the better pitches in college football. He can go into any living room, look at the kid and say, I've been you. Look at the parents, say, my parents have been you, and I know how to navigate the situation. Is he the only one that knows how to do it? No. Clemson just got that big-time running back commit we talked about to kick off the show, the one in 2025. CJ Spiller, huge reason for that. But having a guy that played that long in the NFL, that played at that high of a level in college, sitting down and saying, hey, not only did I do great things in high school, not only did I do great things in college, not only did I have a great NFL career, I've sent how many guys to the NFL now? Tough pitch to say no to. So any running back that visits Oklahoma, we have to realize DeMarco Murray has a pitch that has a lot of reason and a lot of logic to it. And we also need to realize Jeff Lebby and what this offense does. Jeff Lebby is going to run the football. He's going to get guys involved. We just saw Eric Gray have a huge year for Oklahoma, and Barnes was at 500 yards. It's not like Barnes had an insignificant year. He had a big year as well. And Eric Gray was at like 1,300 yards. I mean, Eric Gray went off this year, did it all. So you see my point, right? We can never sleep on an Oklahoma running back battle. But the fact is that this is an OU USC battle. This is one we're going to have to keep up with. The other name, Caden Durham, number 102 in the nation, number 10 running back, once again out the state of Texas, super speedster. We know this guy has got legitimate track speed, but that's the name of the game here, track. I know Oklahoma, there was a time not long ago they felt like they were the leader. And maybe they are. But depending on who you talk to, people say LSU is in a really good position. And I do want to bring up what I just said, track. Because whenever I've talked to people about Caden Durham, whenever I've talked to those that I haven't had the ability to talk to Caden Durham, I just actually created the official Around the Table Sports Twitter account. So y'all can... I'll plug that up here in a bit, and that's where you can find all of the content we'll be going to now. All right, so that'll be easier for us to interact. I haven't had the opportunity to talk to Caden Durham, but when I've talked to people that are in the know on the situation, they say he does have an interest. 50% of snaps, I should tell you enough about Lebby. Yeah. I mean, he's going to get his running backs active prime time, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. But what I've heard on Caden Durham is he does have an interest in running track at the next level. And if that's true, that's not going to be easy to pull him away from LSU. Because as much as I can say, DeMarco Murray and Oklahoma have a phenomenal history at the running back position, LSU, they have a history at the running back position as well. OU's put out a lot of guys here recently, but we know what LSU does in terms of development, but we can't argue with their track team. What are you going to say to that? If he has the ability to do both, LSU could be enticing. And not only that, Oklahoma fans, hot take, you're really hoping that Texas lands Colin Simmons. You want to know why? I'm not saying that Caden Durham is going to follow Colin Simmons, but if it's a battle between Oklahoma and LSU for Caden Durham, and it's a battle between LSU and Texas for Colin Simmons, you don't want LSU getting any more drops in their bucket. What I mean is this. Let's say LSU wins that battle for Simmons. That's Durham's teammate. Well, that's not going to make the decision for him. Now he has to realize there's a little piece of home coming with me if I go to LSU. One of the guys that I grew up with, just went to high school with, is going to be on the team. My family can commute with his family and vice versa. I can commute with him to go back home and vice versa. So it won't be the reason he commits anywhere. That's not my contention. My contention is think of recruiting as filling up a water bottle. There are drops that go into that bucket. This is a time where you're rooting for Texas to win that 5-star edge if you want Caden Durham. You are. And that's awesome for someone like myself who just loves recruiting. Just loves recruiting. Just to see that. Got some pork butt in the so you can enjoy. Yeah, that's going to be fun, man. That's going to be fun. And the last name we're going to talk about, Bennett Warren on the offensive line. Look, Bill Bedenbaugh is as good as an offensive line coach as we find in college football. I think my biggest question, and I've had this for a while, why doesn't Oklahoma land more 5-star offensive linemen? It is genuinely one of the biggest head scratchers in college football. Why they don't land more 5-star offensive linemen. When we look at what they do in the NFL, can you argue with the production? No. Can you argue with the money they're getting? No. Bill Bedenbaugh develops them now. Let's get one thing understood. But when we look at the battle for Bennett Warren, top player in the class, I think he's 6'7". I mean, he's a massive human being. Top 150 player in the nation, top 10 offensive tackle, top 30 player in the state of Texas. He came off a visit to Michigan he loved. Now, typically, I would come back at you and say, oh, Bill Bedenbaugh, the development there. Unfortunately for Oklahoma, there's a name at Michigan that you're all too familiar with. Sherrone Moore. Easily one of the best coaches in the nation for the offensive line. True SEC. Very good point. Very good point. Very good point. And Cracker, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. But I also think that that's a little bit of a double-edged sword, no? Because like some of those top offensive linemen that have been rated as 5-star have gone to places like Alabama and Georgia, and and then they've been top 10 picks. So it's not like their evaluations were wrong. But that is a good point. It kind of goes into the conversation we have about Nick Saban and Dabo Swinney all the time, that they want guys to camp and then they build their own list. So I don't disagree with you. But there's also been a high number of those 5-star offensive linemen that have gone real high in the draft. And I've just always been real surprised why Bill Bedenbaugh doesn't have more of them. But going on, right? Who's getting paid? Yeah, I mean, sure. No doubt about it. But I mean, that's also, there are some guys like Evan Neal was just a top 10 draft pick. He's not up for a new contract, right? He just got to the NFL. I don't disagree with you, but the only reason why I can't 100% go in agreement is that's to say that other schools like Michigan, like Georgia, like Alabama, who have been getting these high 4, 5-star guys, their guys are going to the NFL too. So it's not like their evaluations are bad, right? I'm gonna trust a Coach Wolford when he looks at a Caden Proctor, and he's like, that guy. Coach Wolford is a great offensive line coach as well. So I don't disagree with you. And I think you're on to the conversation of Bill Bedenbaugh's development as an offensive line coach is unbelievable. Unbelievable, his development as an offensive line coach. And I'm not arguing with the results in the NFL because you're 100% right. Bill Bedenbaugh's guys get paid the most in the NFL. My only point here, Cracker, is that other guys still get paid very well, still go very highly in the NFL draft, and I'm just surprised more of those guys don't have OU as a top school because of Bill Bedenbaugh, right? That's kind of the conversation here. But Bennett Warren now was a guy that Oklahoma felt good on. Now he seems to be a Michigan lean off the back of a former Sooner, Sherrone Moore. So can Oklahoma get back in this battle? Tough to say, but that's why this weekend is big. Look, I'm going to end this on what I said not long ago. Visits are very important. You can always say follow the visits, and that is true, right? There is some logic there. Follow the visits. But I will always say this right here. I've always thought that we undervalue unofficial visits and we may overvalue official visits. think unofficial visits are very important. Being able to get in a guy after he has a great time somewhere else is now your ability to set the bar. And this is Oklahoma's ability to set the bar this weekend for some must-land prospects. Before we get out of here, we're going to check some comments. Pure development standpoint, Bill Bedenbaugh is top 3, if not number one. Yeah, I mean, how do you argue it, right? No, that just continues to go in. And like, perfect. You're 100% right. I'm not arguing your point because you are right. It'd be a losing argument for me. It's just that whenever he's this good at developing, I just cannot believe he hasn't gotten. I mean, unless there were only 2 5-star O linemen. Shadow, can you clarify this? Because there were several more than 2. Caden Proctor is now at Alabama. He was a 5-star. Francis Malinoa, 5-star. He's at Miami. 2 5. Yeah. Ty, gonna dip, but always appreciate your content commentary. Keep up. Thank you for being here, SEC. We're about to get out of here as well. I just want to Shadow. I'm also like brain is mush right now. So if you could just hit me with that one again. Keaton says he may kind of have that Gundy thing where he doesn't really like to recruit. I don't know. I don't know either. I'd be fascinated to speak with someone who would know more. And you know what? I'll probably ask that on the JP and Trav show tonight. You know what? I am going to ask that tonight. I'm going to write that down right now. Centers and got it. Maybe missing centers and guards. Apologies. Got it. Yeah, and also it's the rankings are all over the place there. But guys, thank you all for tuning in. If you don't know, Through the Haze is kind of a new live stream. I'm doing a live show, trying to figure out the details as I'm trying to figure out some next moves for the channel and all that good stuff. But kind of a theory to do a more standard college football live show where I get to give my opinions, thoughts in a situation like this where it goes for an hour, 2 hours. We sit down, have a good time. At the end, kind of do this right here. The Monday, Wednesday live shows, they'll still remain because those are our fan interaction shows where we get to really talk a lot, you guys, with the guests we bring on. And those are always a good time. Those aren't going anywhere. But I also wanted to also give you guys more of a structured live show because sometimes in our Monday and Friday shows, they're great. We might have 5 topics we want to cover and we'll get through 2 and we'll be at 2 hours in because we've just gone all over the place. So I don't want to shortchange y'all on any content. I want to have a show where I can be a bit more structured, get the points out to y'all so they all aren't missing anything. But as always, thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you tonight on the JP and Trav show. I'll see you tomorrow for the live stream and all the content coming out then. Until then, see you next time. That's it. Spinning wheel.